3 months in Eastern Europe, and this is just when the communists were kind of leaving Europe, especially Poland and Eastern Europe. Gorbachev was a new premier, and it made a great big difference in the attitude in that area. So this is the second part, and we start out in Warsaw, and in Chicago, I had booked a trip with the Soviet Interest Agency to take care of all of our travels in Russia and Belarus, all through the Soviet Union. And so here we are, leaving Warsaw and going to Minsk. However, I had booked it so that we would travel at night and visit all day when we got there. And the train they booked us on in Warsaw was a Russian train. Its toilet was a hole in the floor, and the sleeping cars there were about 5 rooms to one car, and there were about 6 cars on a train, and the sleeping accommodations were upper and lower bunks, 2 to a room, and there was absolutely no privacy. We faced each other. So Sue made a traveling bag. She took a lot of video, and before we left, a fellow in our dorm asked us if we would like to have some rubles, and we asked, well, how much? He said, well, about 10 cents a ruble. So we bought a bunch of rubles and headed toward Belarus on the train. Now, when in the course of talking about, discussing with Sue, a man and his daughter got on the train. She was a very young lady, and I told Sue, I said, look, you better be careful what you say, or they're going to deport you to Siberia. And this young lady smiled. Later on, we found out she spoke English and had a conversation with her, and we asked her where she lived. She said Siberia. So when we got to the edge of the Soviet Union at Belarus, the Russians had moved their rails 10 centimeters apart, so no train from Western Europe could get into the Soviet Union. And so when we got to the border, they had hydraulic jacks, picked the whole train up, and put a new undercarriage under it. Just a tremendous thing. And we finally got to sleep, and all of a sudden the attendant came in and said, Minsk, Minsk, Minsk. We ran over to the platform, tried to open the door, and it wouldn't open. And it didn't look like a city to us. So then she kept running in. She said, no Minsk, no Minsk. She was going by the schedule, and the train was late. So we got to Minsk, and people were going to work in the morning, and there was supposed to be somebody from the in-tourist area to guide us. Well, there was nobody there. So we got in a cab, went to the in-tourist office, and told this person who spoke very good English, we said, we'd like to have a decent train to get to Moscow. But on the other hand, we'd also like to have a tour of Minsk. So we, she said, well, okay, be out there at 2 o'clock, and we will have an English-speaking guide for you. So we got out there at 2 o'clock. Here's this young lady, our guide, and a big bus. I said, where are the rest of the people? And she said, I'm sorry, we couldn't get a car. So here's Sue and I, the guide and the bus driver, on this great big bus. Their economy was really screwed up. Anyway, this is a fountain in a park in Minsk. Very pretty area, and evidently all the sprays were going inside because Sue was sitting on the edge. One of the buildings in Minsk, very interesting sculptures, depicting, of course, the working person, etc. This is a Hero Square in Minsk. And again, you can see the tribute to the victory of the Russians in the war. And these two are high school kids, and they have, they're guarding that area with wooden guns. They were really quite that conscious. We went into a church in Minsk, and a wedding was going on. There were 2 couples being married. A very, very beautiful ceremony. The government buildings in Minsk, and typical of all of the Russian structures, there's virtually no architecture here. They're all square boxes. Now we are on our way to Moscow, and the train that she got us to board was an express train. It was a very nice train. And so we went from Minsk to Moscow. And this is the gate to Moscow. And you'll notice that the bricks are all red. They call it Red Square, and it is very, very red. Just outside is a panorama of churches. Evidently, the Tsars had built a lot of churches. There is 1, 2, 3, 4. And of course, a big bell in the church. The churches were really beautiful. We're in Red Square, and that's a statue of Lenin. We're in Moscow, yes. And this is the walls of the Red Square, and off to the left is Lenin's tomb. The guide told us that it really wasn't Lenin's body, it was a rock's reproduction. Now, we are at the entrance of St. Basil's Cathedral, a magnificent structure. However, I didn't get a good picture of the structure itself. This is an entrance, and as you can see, it is engraved with semi-precious stones. The only other building that we had seen with that was at the Taj Mahal in India. A picture taken from the window of St. Basil's of Red Square. Now, this is GUM, G-U-M, and I don't know what G-U-M stands for, but is the biggest uh, mall in Moscow. Their wares were very limited. Books, you could get books all over Russia. You could get cards, you could get knives and certain things, but their inventory was very poor, especially with Russian money. And somebody announced that they were getting a shipment of shoes, and a number of people went down there to see if they could find some shoes. One thing about Russian currency, the official rate was $1.60 a ruble. The street rate was 10 cents, a ratio of 16-1. So really the Soviet economy was really in ruin. This is Arbat Street, a very, very interesting street. You could get your picture profile cut out. You can take a picture with Mickey Mouse. You could, and they had just so many things regularly on every block. And about every block was a musician. Here is a flutist. The next one was a trumpet player, and et cetera, et cetera. Just a very, very interesting street. Moscow University. Again, it's not very architect, generally square with a few embellishments, but it was the University of Moscow. This is a ski slide that was at the 1980 Olympics. The U.S. boycotted these Olympics because the Russians had invaded Afghanistan. So President Carter declared that no U.S. Sports would take place there. This is the Don Cossack entertainment group. They were really great. They were wonderful. And while we were there, we attended the Bolshoi ballet with a performance of Giselle. Really a beautiful performance. We traveled in the Moscow subway. It was a very fine subway, had much art. Here we are boarding a plane for Kiev in the Ukraine. The interior of these planes, these Russian planes, was really quite poor. Some of the seats were broken, etc. But the pilots were excellent. And here we are on our way from Moscow to Kiev. And we know that Kiev is in the news because they have pulled away from Russia. On a hill in Kiev overlooking the Dnieper River, there are caves below here that were used as really monasteries. And I don't know if they still are, but it was really a very interesting view. All over the Soviet Union were monuments to the victory of the Soviet Army. And here we have several. Another statue. St. Andrew's Church. The churches in the Orthodox churches were loaded with gold leaf, and they're really quite beautiful. When we were walking in Kiev, a man walked up to me and said, could I borrow some dollars? I said, well, okay, sure. Uh, how much are you selling it for? Well, 10 cents a ruble. So we bought another bunch of rubles. And as I kept on walking, there was a woman walked up to me and said, could you sell me some dollars? The same thing. And I asked them, I said, aren't you afraid of doing this on the street? And they said, no, not in Kiev. Oh, we are boarding a plane for St. Petersburg. It was then Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. This is our guide, Natasha, a very intelligent woman, fluent in English, very, very knowledgeable about history and current events. And she was really damning the communists. And I asked her, I said, aren't you afraid of speaking against the communists that way? She said, no, Gorbachev is the premier, and there no longer is a danger. So actually, Russia turned away from communism. Now we are on our way to St. Petersburg. At that time, it was Leningrad. It was originally St. Petersburg, and when the communists took over, they made it Leningrad, and then afterwards, it's back to St. Petersburg. This is a window from our hotel in Leningrad. Now, the ship that you see here is the ship Aurora, and it is reputed that the crew of the Aurora started the Bolshevik Revolution. They mutinied, and that caught on to the rest of the country, and as you know, the country became communist in 1917. A statue of Peter the Great. Peter the Great realized that Russia had to modernize and spent a lot of time in Western Europe to gather ideas for Russia. However, Sweden was invading Russia at the time, and he spent a good little part of his reign in fighting the Swedes, which eventually he did. They claim that this statue, which is connected by these hind legs, is most unusual. Peter the Great's throne. A trip through St. Petersburg. When we were on a bus, and these are nautical symbols, I think put up by Peter the Great, because he wanted to form a navy. And as we were on the bus, there was a man being roughed up by another couple of men, and a couple of the guys on the bus were going to get off and help him. And the bus driver says, no, 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 no. That man is dealing in foreign currency. And we had a whole bag full of rubles. Typical church. These churches were just beautiful. If you look at all the details, not only the outside but the inside of these Orthodox churches. And here you can see they're doing some renovation. This is Victory Square with a flame in the middle in typical fashion, and the St. Peter, Leningrad, was surrounded by the German army, and was under a siege for 872 days. And in there, it was the greatest devastation of any city in history. 1.5 million people died, and they were buried in mass graves. These were the people that died in 1942 and people that died in 1943. We met a man with his wife who evidently was a soldier in the Russian army. Take a look at the number of medals he's got on him. He's loaded with medals. We then went to the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. Now, the Hermitage Museum housed all of the art that the czars had collected for centuries. And the paintings in there, a lot of them were just priceless. And some of them were Italian Renaissance paintings too, by Michelangelo and the Renaissance paintings. Here we are with Sue's video camera in hand. This is our group ready to depart. These people are all from Brazil, very fine people, and of course our guide, Natasha. What? Yeah. By that time, the video camera was put away, and somebody had evidently told the guard that somebody was taking videos, and everything worked out fine. Mum was the word. Okay, we are now on our way to Vienna. Vienna, Austria. From a street in Vienna, oops, a street in Vienna, and here. This is a monument to the Black Plague that actually it devastated, it killed 76,000 Viennese in 1679. And the main street with this depiction of the horror that came about because of the Black Plague. St. Stephen's Church, a beautiful church, and of course St. Stephen is the patron of Austria. Statue of Mozart in a park, beautifully done. Now this is a statue of Maria Theresa. The Habsburg dynasty ruled Austria for many centuries, and the only female empress was Maria Theresa, and this was a statue and a monument to her. Her children included 2 kings and 2 queens. One of the queens was Marie Antoinette, and I don't know if you remember that, but she was the Queen of France, the wife of Charles XVI. And Charles XVI and Marie Antoinette were guillotined in Paris. The entrance to the Schönbrunn Gardens, beautiful area. This is the Schönbrunn Palace and Gardens. they have a little restaurant, tea garden, and we had coffee and crumpets, and birds would come right on our table and start eating the crumbs, which have never seen that before. We are now in the palace, in the Museum of Fine Arts. Beautifully done. Every room was well lit. Every room had a recording thermometer. Every room had a recording moisture gauge. And it was just, everything was done just beautifully. This is a bust of Emperor Franz Joseph, the last emperor of Austria. And my uncle had immigrated from the Austrian sector of Poland and said that he thought Franz Joseph was a good man. And the other thing and when we were in the South Island of New Zealand, there was a glacier named Franz Joseph. And I don't know how that happened, but it was. And his nephew, Archduke Ferdinand, was killed by a Serb in Sarajevo. And immediately the Austrians started to invade Serbia. And Russia, being Orthodox and also using the Cyrillic alphabet, joined Serbia to prevent Austria from invading Serbia. When Russia got into the war, Germany got into the war on the Austrian side. And so therefore, you had the background of World War I. Johann Strauss had written a bunch of beautiful waltzes, and one of his was Tale of the Vienna Woods. And so I was determined to go to the Vienna Woods. And this is a beautiful stairway on the way to the woods. And these are the Vienna Woods. Just a very peaceful location. At the top of the Vienna Woods, high in a hilltop, was a view of the Danube River. And very, very interesting view from here. This is an interesting place. It's a government building. This plaque right here gives a story of where the Ottomans had surrounded Vienna and were about to take Vienna. And the Austrian emperor called on the Polish king to help him. He came with the Polish army and with some of the Austrian soldiers, had driven the Ottomans not only out of Vienna, but also out of Austria. And my son tells me that in Istanbul, there is a statue to the Polish king, Jan Sobieski, who they claim was the fiercest fighter that they'd ever faced. A bunch of Viennese enjoying the afternoon. So we then traveled from Vienna to Budapest. And Budapest is named for the Buda Hills on the west side of the Danube and Pest on the east side. Here we arrived, and as we arrived, a woman came up and said, "Would you like to have a place to stay?" And we said we sure would. So we stayed here. And this is the proprietor and Sue. I don't know what Zimmer means. What does it mean? Rooms. Oh, okay. This is a castle on the Buddha side. Um, Very nicely done, and probably one of the early fortifications. The Parliament building on the Pest side, the east side of the Danube River. A government building in Pest, and it was reputed that the um, king of Hungary had lived here for a while. This is a street in Pest, and of course it's the economic center of Budapest, and a statue, a very, very interesting statue with made of copper, of course, which when oxidized turns green. And down below are a bunch of kids playing in the water. Here is a bronze manhole cover. Have you ever seen a bronze manhole cover? Anyway, it was really very artistic and beautiful. The country had a lot of money at one time, and they did things in a very ornate way. This is a piece of artwork on the abutment to a bridge across the Danube River, and, of course, a boat on the Danube River. This is the Pest side of the Danube at night. They had a boat that was free that would go up and down the river and pick up passengers and discharge passengers. It was kind of like a free taxi. And they dropped us off at one place, and we were able to get into a concert. Very, very interesting. Very enjoyable. We are on our route to Szentendre. Szentendre is a kind of a distant suburb of Budapest. And when the Ottomans invaded Budapest, the people all fled towards Szentendre, and the Ottomans never got that far. And municipal building in Szentendre, and this is a walkway to the restaurant we had in Szentendre. One of the most delicious meals I had ever eaten. And I was wondering what made it so great. Well, when we got home, there was a man who was talking a little bit about Hungarian history. Caught my attention, but he was a chef demonstrating Hungarian cooking. And he said, I hate to tell you this, but the first thing you do in Hungarian cooking is to take and render a piece of lard. And here we are, we're leaving Budapest, and we're on our way to Poprad. Now, Poprad is in the mountains. It's on the border between Czechoslovakia and Poland. And this is a field of, I think it's rapeseed. They make oil from it, but I'm not totally sure. Another view from the train window, and a station on the train. And when we got here, the conductor said, okay, everybody out. And I had a map. I said, this is not Poprad. And he looked at me, and he took Sue's luggage, and I took mine, went up on a train platform, down to the next train, up and down to the next train, and said, Poprod. We finally got on the right train. Expansion joint in pipeline, which I think was natural gas. A river in Czechoslovakia, in the mountains. And again, quite foggy. We're at the border of, we're in Poprod at the border where Sue is checking in our passport and credentials. And from there, we took a bus into Poland, into Zakopane. It's a relatively small distance, but there it is. Anyway, in a larger view, it's from Poprod down below up to Zakopane, Poland, up above. And this is in the Tatra Mountains, and of course a beautiful area and a shelter. So we decided to take a cable car, and as you can see, here's a tower, cable tower, and a view from the cable car, and again, very foggy. Here's probably something that none of you have ever seen. This is an international monument depicting the borderline between Poland and Czechoslovakia, right here. This is Czechoslovakia, this is Poland. And further up the line was a warning sign. You are entering Czechoslovakia. Do not enter. Anybody read the Czech language? Okay. Anyway, we have now decided that we're going to my family's residence in a place called Stare Żukowice, Poland. And on the way was a cave. Now, the picture is very blurry because the people were walking. And this is a cave that people hid in during the war. Here I am with my two cousins, Genevieve and Maria. Now, Maria's father was conscripted by the Austrian army, was wounded, and made it home and died in his own bed. And she was telling us about her experiences during the war. And evidently there were a number of battles where they lived. And she said, in order to keep from getting raped, the young girls had to smear themselves with mud. This is the home of my cousin, Genevieve, and her son, husband, and her husband's wife. The homes were her home was really quite very nice, even by American standards. They generally were teachers or engineers, but evidently doing quite well financially. This is their little Fiat, and that is Eugene, her son. They had little cars because the price of gas was very high. This is Genevieve's husband, Joseph. He was with the Polish army that captured Monte Cassino from the Germans. It was a stronghold in Italy, and then continued down Italy with the forces to free Italy from the German army. There weren't many decorations, but the churches generally were decorated. This was my cousin's church. From there, we we're going home, and so from Stara Żukowice over to Warsaw. And here we're getting ready to leave. My cousin Genevieve and Sue, and then she boarded a plane for Milwaukee. And thus ends our tour of Eastern Europe. Thank you.